The sun was a fist. It struck the land without mercy, a relentless beating from a pale yellow sky. This was the 1850s, and the land was a raw, unfinished thing, a place of baked rock and shimmering heat. The desert stretched in every direction, a canvas of reds and browns, broken only by the skeletal arms of saguaro and the thorny grasp of mesquite. It was a place that demanded survival and offered nothing in return. Here, water was a prayer, and shade was a miracle. Kai moved through this furnace. He was a man made of the desert, his skin the color of worn leather, his movements economical and silent. He was Dine, a warrior of the people. But the people he belonged to, his wife, his son, his kin, were gone. They were smoke on the wind, memories that haunted the high canyons. He was alone, a solitary figure in an immense, hostile world. He carried a bow. He carried a quiver of arrows he had fletched himself. A knife was sheathed at his belt. He wore moccasins and simple breeches. He was lean, not from choice but from necessity. His black hair was tied back, and his eyes, dark and deep, were never still. They scanned the ridges, the arroyos, the vast, empty sky. He was not traveling to a destination. He was simply moving, a ghost in his own homeland. His journey was a dangerous one. The world he knew had been shattered. Now, this land was contested, blue-coated cavalry patrols. The soldiers rode from their new, raw forts. They were hunting ghosts, hunting men like him. They called it peace. They called it order. Kai knew it was conquest. He had seen their work. He carried the proof of it inside him. A cold, heavy stone where his heart should be. He skirted the edges of the new territories. He avoided the deep ruts of the wagon trails, the paths of the settlers, the Bilagana, who came in a relentless stream from the east. They came with their wagons, their shouting, their strange animals. They cut down the ancient cottonwoods by the rivers. They fenced the open plains. They saw the land as empty, a void to be filled by their hopes. They did not see the spirits in the rock or the ancient histories written in the canyons. They did not see him. And that, he knew, was the only thing that kept him alive. He walked with memory. It was his only companion. In the oppressive silence of the midday heat, he heard his wife, Ala, humming. She had a low, soft hum, a sound like a bee in a patch of clover. He saw her hands, strong and sure, as she worked the loom, weaving the patterns of their lives into the wool. He remembered the smell of her hair, a scent of sage and clean earth. And he remembered his son, TSO, a small boy with serious eyes. He had been teaching him the bow. He remembered the boy's small hand in his, the feeling of the smooth wood, the quiet pride as the boy learned to hold it steady. These memories were not comforts. They were knives. They came unbidden, sharp and sudden. He would see a hawk circling, and he would remember Tso's fascination with the sky. He would find a clear spring, and he would remember Allah laughing as she splashed water on his face. Then the other memory would come, the one that blotted out the sun. The invaders, they had not been soldiers in uniform. They had been men, settlers from a nearby valley, their faces twisted with a righteousness that was more terrifying than simple hate. They had come at dawn. There had been fire. There had been the sounds of chaos, the sharp crack of rifles, the smell of powder and burning homes. He had fought. He was a warrior. He had fought with the desperation of a man protecting everything he loved. But they were many. He had been struck, a blow to the head that had sent him into darkness. When he woke, the world was gone. The sky was black with smoke. His home was ashes. And his family. He had found them. He had performed the rites. He had buried them under the stones, facing the rising sun, as was the way. But a part of him had been buried there, too. The man who had lived, the man who had loved, was gone. The man who remained was something else, a shell, a survivor. Survival was a grim business. It was a daily calculation of risk. It was the taste of hunger and the ache of thirst. It was the cold of the desert night, a cold that seeped into the bones. He hunted, but only what he needed. A rabbit, a bird. He knew the plants. He could find water where it seemed impossible. He had the skills of his people, but he used them now only to fuel his own solitary existence. He climbed a mesa, his hands and feet finding holds in the rock that seemed invisible. From the top, the world opened up below him. He could see for 50 miles. The air was so clear it hurt the eyes. He saw the purple shadows of distant mountains. He saw the vast, flat plain. And he saw dust. Far to the north, a thin, rising plume. It was not wind. It was riders. He watched, his body perfectly still. They were moving fast, too fast for a simple patrol. Maybe 8, 10 of them. Not soldiers. Their movement was too ragged. Settlers, perhaps, or renegades. In this new world, the lines were often blurred. They were heading west, away from him. He would wait. He would let them pass. He would give them a wide berth. This was the rhythm of his life. Watch. Wait. Avoid. He was a warrior, but he did not seek a fight. He had seen what fighting brought. It brought ash. It brought silence. He had no war left in him, only a profound, echoing emptiness. He was just passing through. He did not know where he was going. He only knew what he was leaving behind. He made a cold camp that night, in a shallow overhang of rock. He ate jerked rabbit meat, chewing it slowly, his senses alert. The sun bled out of the sky, painting the clouds in violent strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt like a mockery. The desert stars emerged, sharp and bright as chips of ice. They were the same stars his ancestors had watched, the same stars that had looked down on his wife and son. He lay on the hard rock, but he did not sleep. Not for a long time. He listened to the night, the yip of a distant coyote, the scurry of some small creature in the brush, the wind, always the wind, whispering through the canyons. It sounded like voices. It sounded like mourning. This was his world, the mid-19th century, a time of iron and blood, a time when the ground itself was soaked in sorrow. He was a part of it, a man walking through the ruins of his own life, a man who had lost everything. He was a survivor, tough and resilient, but he was moving through a world that had no place for him. He was a ghost, and he was just passing through. For 3 days he walked. He walked south, toward the broken lands, a maze of red rock canyons and dry washes. The heat was a solid thing, a weight on his shoulders. The sun was a white hole in a sky of bleached blue. He moved with the land, following the shadows as they grew and shrank, resting in the midday when the lizards themselves sought refuge under the rocks. He was a creature of the desert, patient and enduring. His grief was a second shadow, a dark companion that walked beside him. He did not think of the future. He did not reflect on the past. He simply was. He existed. He moved. This was all that was left. He was making his way down a long, winding arroyo, the high walls offering some small relief from the relentless sun. The sand was deep, and his moccasins made no sound. He was thinking of water. He had enough in his gut, but he would need more by nightfall. He knew of a small seep, a place of ferns and damp rock, perhaps half a day's journey from here. He was focused on that. Water. The next step. The step after that. A sound stopped him. It was not a hawk. It was not a coyote. It was not the wind. It was a voice, a man's voice, sharp and ugly. It was followed by a brittle laugh. Kai melted into the rock. He did not pause. He did not think. He became part of the shadow, part of the stone, his body pressed flat against the canyon wall, his hand moving to the knife at his belt, a simple, instinctive gesture. He held his breath. He listened. The voices were close. Around the next bend in the arroyo, there were several. They were loud, filled with a cruel confidence. They were not hiding. They were not afraid. This meant they were the ones to be feared. His every instinct, honed by months of survival, screamed at him to go back, to climb the canyon wall, to disappear. This was not his concern. This was the world of men, the world of the Bilagana, and it held nothing for him but pain. He was a ghost. Ghosts do not meddle in the affairs of the living. He began to move, stepping backward, silent as smoke. He would find another path. He would go around. Then he heard another sound. It was not a voice. It was a sharp cry. Cut short, a sound of pain. A woman. He froze. The stone against his back felt cold, despite the heat. He heard the man's voice again, louder this time, thick with malice. He heard a thud, a small, desperate sound, like a bird trapped in a snare. The memory of ash and smoke filled his mouth. He saw his wife's face, her eyes wide with terror. He saw his son, small and confused. He saw the men, their faces twisted with pleasure as they brought ruin. He did not want to look. He knew what he would see. He knew what men were capable of. He had seen the absolute worst of it. To look would be to invite that world back in. To look would be to make it real again. But his feet would not move. He was trapped, not by the men, but by that small, hopeless sound. It was the sound of his own past. It was the sound of the grave. Slowly, his body stiff with resistance, he turned. He began to move toward the voices. He was no longer a ghost. He was a hunter. He moved along the canyon wall, using the sparse cover of brittle bush and creosote. He climbed a tumble of boulders, his movements fluid and certain. From the top, he could see. Below him, in a small, open patch of sand, were 3 men. They were white men, dressed in filthy canvas trousers and torn shirts. They had the look of prospectors, or perhaps something worse, men who had been too long in the wilderness, their humanity baked out of them. They had pistols at their hips and rifles leaning against the rock. And there was the woman. She was young. She was on her knees in the sand. Her black hair was unbound, tangled with dirt. Her clothing was ripped. He could see the dark soil of her skin, the unmistakable features of the people. She was Dine, or perhaps Hopi, or Ute. It did not matter. She was one of the native people, and she was alone. One man stood over her, his shadow covering her. He held a length of rope. He laughed, and the sound was like gravel shifting. The second man sat on a rock, cleaning his fingernails with a long knife, watching with casual interest. The third man was pacing, his movements agitated, angry. "She is nothing but a savage," the pacing man said. His voice was a high whine. "We should have just left her, or finished it. She is bad luck. She is worth something," the man with the rope said. He gestured with his chin. "Maybe not in a town, but down south, or to the soldiers. They pay for scalps." The man on the rock looked up from his knife. "They pay for Navajo scalps. Is she Navajo?" "Who cares?" the rope man said. "She is red. That is all they need to know." The woman said nothing. She was trembling, but she held her head up. She looked at them with a hate so pure it was almost beautiful. It was a hate Kai recognized. It was the hate of the utterly powerless. Kai watched from the rocks. His heart was a stone. He had been right. This was the world that had taken everything. These were the men. They were the same men who had burned his home. They were the same men who had taken Allah and TSO. Their faces were different, but their souls were the same. He should leave. He truly should. He had a bow. He had a knife. They had 3 rifles and 3 pistols. The odds were poor. And for what, for a stranger, a woman who was already lost his life, was his own? The only thing he had salvaged from the fire. To throw it away now, for this was madness. He remembered his promise. The promise he had made as he buried his son. He had promised to live. He had promised to endure. He had promised to carry their memory. He could not do that if he was dead in a dry riverbed. He began to recede, pulling back from the edge of the rock. It was a terrible thing. He felt a sickness in his stomach. He was a coward, but he was a living coward. He would be a living coward who could still remember his son's laugh. A dead hero was just bones. He took one step back. The man with the rope grew tired of the conversation. He kicked the woman, a lazy, brutal motion that sent her sprawling onto her side. She cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. "Get up," he snarled. She pushed herself up slowly, her body aching. The third man, the whining one, suddenly lunged forward. "I am tired of this. I will end it." He grabbed one of the rifles from the rock. He was not a warrior. He was clumsy, his hands shaking with a strange, vicious energy. He lifted the rifle, not to his shoulder to shoot, but high, like a club. He was going to bring the heavy wooden stock down on her head. The woman, Sarah, saw it. She saw the shadow of the rifle rise. She looked up at the man, and her face changed. The hate was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a vast, empty despair. She closed her eyes. She let out a small breath, a sound that was not a word, not a cry. It was the sound of surrender, the sound of the last hope leaving a body. It was the last sound Allah had made. Kai stopped. The world stopped. The heat, the sun, the whispering wind, it all vanished. There was only that sound. It plunged into his chest like a spear of ice. It shattered the cold, dead stone of his heart. He did not remember drawing the bow. He did not remember knocking the arrow. He was an instrument, the spirit of his ancestors, the rage of his loss. It moved through him. The arrow left the string with a sound that was less than a whisper. The man with the rifle froze. His eyes went wide. A look of profound surprise crossed his face. He looked down. The shaft of the arrow was protruding from his throat. He made a wet, gurgling sound. His fingers opened. The rifle fell to the sand. He pitched forward, landing in a heap. For a second, there was total silence. The other two men stared at their fallen companion. They could not understand what had happened. The man on the rock was the first to react. He jumped up, pulling his pistol. "What, who?" He never finished. Kai was already moving. He was not a man. He was a cougar. He launched himself from the boulders, landing in the sand in a silent crouch. He covered the distance in 3 long strides. The man with the pistol fired. A wild, panicked shot that kicked up sand 10 feet to Kai's left. The canyon walls threw the sound back and forth. A deafening explosion. Kai's knife was in his hand. He slammed into the man, the force of his attack carrying them both to the ground. The man was burly, but he was soft. He was not a fighter. He was a tormentor. Kai was a warrior. The fight was over before it began. The knife was swift. It was merciless. It was final. Kai rolled, coming to his feet. The last man, the one who had held the rope, was scrambling backward, his face a mask of pure terror. He had dropped the rope. He was trying to get to the last rifle, leaning against the far wall. Kai picked up the rifle from the first man. He did not raise it to his shoulder. He did not aim. He simply held it, a piece of the world he despised. The man stopped. He looked at Kai. He looked at his 2 dead companions. He looked at the woman. He raised his hands slowly. "No," he whispered. "Please. We were just—" Kai did not move. He just watched him. The man's words died. He saw the look in Kai's eyes. It was an emptiness that was more frightening than rage. It was the look of the desert itself, dead, vast, uncaring. The man turned and ran. He scrambled up the side of the arroyo, his boots slipping on the loose rock. He clawed his way to the top and disappeared. Kai let him go. He did not care. The threat was over. He stood in the sudden, terrible silence. The canyon was still. The 2 men lay unmoving. The sun beat down. He was breathing hard, not from the effort, but from the adrenaline, from the return of a feeling he thought was long dead. The fire of combat. It made him feel sick. It made him feel alive. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He looked at the knife. He cleaned it on the dead man's trousers and sheathed it. He had done it. He had stepped back into the world. He had killed again, and for what? He turned his head and looked at the woman. She was staring at him. Her eyes were wide, dark pools of terror. She had pushed herself back against the canyon wall. As far as she could get, she was looking at him, the man who had just appeared from the rocks, the man who had just killed 2 men with a terrifying, silent efficiency. She did not see a rescuer. She saw a new danger. She saw a killer. The old feeling, the grief, the emptiness. It rushed back in, a cold tide. He had done this for nothing. He had traded his peace, his ghostly existence, for this, for a woman who was now terrified of him. He had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He turned his back on her. He would leave. He would walk away. He would walk until his feet bled. He would climb the highest mesa and wait for the sun to take him. He would erase this moment. He would go back to being a ghost. He took 1 step. He took a second. A hand grabbed him. It was small. It was trembling, but it was strong. It fisted the buckskin of his shirt, near his chest. He stopped, his whole body rigid. He looked down. Her hand was bruised and scraped. Her fingers were tight, a desperate, anchoring grip. He looked over his shoulder. She had crawled forward. She was on her knees again, but this time, she was looking at him. Her face was a ruin of dirt, sweat, and fear. But her eyes were no longer terrified. They were something else. A plea, a command, a raw, desperate, human need. She was trying to speak. Her lips were cracked. He saw her tongue move, trying to find moisture. She swallowed, a painful rasp. She spoke 2 words. They were not loud. They were barely a whisper. But in the silence of that canyon, they were a thunderclap. You stay. Kai stood frozen. He did not breathe. He stared at her, at this stranger who had just chained him to the living world. The sun beat down. The wind moved a strand of her hair across her face. He felt the pull of her hand on his shirt. It was the heaviest thing he had ever known. You stay. It was not a request. It was a sentence. He had been just passing through. He had been a man without a destination. But now, a woman with nothing had given him one. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. And he knew. He was not going anywhere. The words hung in the oppressive heat. You stay. They were not a plea. They were a statement of fact, as binding as a rope. Kai stood motionless for a long moment. The world, which had been a blur of red rage and instinctive motion, slowly came back into focus. He felt the sweat on his back. He heard the buzz of a fly, already landing on the man at his feet. He felt the small, trembling grip on his shirt. He looked down at her hand. It was dirty, the knuckles scraped raw. Then he looked at her face. Her eyes held his. They were dark with a terror that had not yet faded. But underneath it, there was a core of iron. She was not begging. She was telling him she was a woman who had lost everything. And in that loss, she had found a strange, desperate authority. He gave a single, slow nod. It was barely a movement, but she understood. Her hand released his shirt. The sudden absence of her touch left a cold spot. She tried to push herself up, but her strength failed. She swayed, her arms giving way. Kai moved. The ghost was gone. The warrior, the guardian, the man he had tried to bury, took over. He caught her before she hit the sand. He lifted her. She was shockingly light, a bundle of rags and brittle bones. She made a small sound, a sharp intake of breath as he touched her. I will not harm you, he said. His voice was rough, like dry stones rubbing together. It was the first time he had spoken to another person in months. The sound of it was alien to him. He carried her to the shade of the canyon wall, away from the 2 men he had killed. He set her down gently, her back against the cool rock, her eyes closed, her face tight with pain. She was hurt, worse than he thought. He looked at the scene, the dead, the blood in the sand, the man who had escaped. This was a bad place. The man would return, and he would not be alone. They had to leave. First, he needed to know what he was dealing with. He knelt in front of her. "Where are you hurt?" Sarah, for that was her name, could barely speak. She shook her head, a gesture of confusion. "Everywhere. He kicked me." Kai's eyes were practical. He ran his hands lightly over her legs, her arms, checking for the unnatural angle of a broken bone. He found nothing broken, but she flinched and gasped when he touched her ribs. Bruised, probably cracked. He saw the gash on her arm, a long, dirty tear from a rock or perhaps the knife of the man he had killed. It was caked with blood and sand. "This needs cleaning," he said. He looked at the dead men. Their canteens were still slung over their bodies. He felt a wave of disgust, but necessity was a harder master than disgust. He walked over to the first man and unhooked his canteen. He took the rifle, 2, and the box of cartridges in the man's pouch. He did the same with the second man. He now had 2 rifles, ammunition, and a nearly full canteen of water. He also took a small canvas sack that felt like it held dried meat. He would not starve. They would not starve. He returned to her. He unstopped the canteen. "You must drink." She looked at the water, then at him. He understood. He drank first, a small sip to show her it was safe. She reached for it with a shaking hand, and he had to help her guide it to her lips. She drank, greedy and desperate, until he gently pulled it away. Not too fast. He set the canteen down and examined her arm. The cut was deep. It would fester in this heat. He had a temporary camp, a small hollow in the rocks, a half-day's walk from here. He had found it weeks ago. It was defensible. It had a view of the approaches. It was safe. He had planned to stay there for a day. Now, it seemed, he had a new purpose for it. "We must go," he said. "I cannot," she whispered. "I cannot walk." He knew. He turned and gathered his bow and quiver. He slung the 2 rifles over his shoulders. He looped the canteens and the food pouch across his chest. He looked ridiculous, a walking arsenal, a man laden with the tools of a world he hated. He felt the weight of it, not just on his shoulders, but on his soul. He went back to her. "I will carry you." She flinched as he slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. "I am sorry," she whispered, as if her weight was an unforgivable burden. "Be silent," he said, but not unkindly. "Save your strength." He lifted her. He was strong, but the climb out of the arroyo was treacherous. The loose rock shifted under his feet. He moved slowly, deliberately, protecting her body with his own. She was light, yet she was the heaviest thing he had ever carried. She was the anchor that had dragged him back from the silent sea of his grief. He hated the anchor, and he could not let it go. She was half conscious, her head resting against his chest. He could feel her breathing, a shallow, painful catch in her ribs. He could smell the fear on her, the metallic tang of blood, the dust of the desert. It was a smell he knew too well. It was the smell of loss. He carried her for hours. The sun moved across the sky, a merciless eye. He did not stop. He did not rest. His guilt was his fuel. He remembered walking away from his burning home. He remembered the weakness in his legs, the feeling of utter, complete failure. Now, he was carrying this woman. It was a penance. He was carrying her away from the death he had failed to stop before. They reached his camp as the sun began to touch the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The camp was not much. A high ledge, protected by a deep overhang of sandstone. It was hidden from below, and it gave him a clear view of the winding canyons for miles. Inside, he had his bedroll and a few cured skins. He laid her down on his own bedroll, the softest thing he owned. She was fading, her skin hot to the touch. The fever was coming. "You are safe here," he said. He built a small fire, just a handful of dry sticks, enough to heat water in his small pot. He took a strip of clean cloth from his own small pack and dipped it in the hot water. He went to her. "This will hurt," he said. She nodded, her eyes closed. He began to clean the gash on her arm. The sand and grime were embedded deep. He worked with a focused, impersonal efficiency. He was a warrior. He knew wounds. He had tended his own. He had tended others, but this felt different. His hands were gentle. He did not know why. It bothered him. She hissed in pain as he cleaned it, but she did not cry out. She was strong. He saw old scars on her hands, the marks of hard work. He saw the dark, ugly bruises on her neck. He felt the rage rise in him again, a cold, black poison. He pushed it down. Rage was a luxury. It was what had gotten his family killed. From now on, there would only be a cold, hard purpose. He finished. He had no bandages. He tore another strip from his spare shirt and bound the wound tightly. She was shivering, even in the warm evening air. He covered her with his cured skins. He sat by the fire, watching her. She fell into a fitful sleep. She spoke in her fever, names he did not know. "Father, no, please run!" she cried out, a small, muffled sound, and her hand shot out, grabbing for something that was not there. Kai did not move. He sat and watched, his face a mask of stone. He was a guardian. The role felt like a mockery. Where was this strength when Allah needed him? Where was this purpose when TSO had cried out? He was a fraud, a man who had survived by failing. He felt a deep, piercing guilt, a shame so profound it made it hard to breathe. He had run from the fight that mattered, and now he had been dragged into a fight that did not. He hated this woman for making him feel. He hated her for needing him. He hated her for being alive when his family was dead. And yet, he sat watch. He did not sleep. He watched her, and he watched the darkness. He was protecting her. He did not understand himself. He was a man split in two. For 2 days, the fever held her. He forced water between her lips. He hunted a quick, silent trip that brought back a rabbit. He made a thin broth and made her drink it. He sat. He waited. He was a patient man. The desert had taught him patience. Grief had taught him patience. On the 3rd morning, he woke from a light doze to find her watching him. Her eyes were clear. The fever had broken. "You stayed," she whispered. "I said I would," he replied. They were silent for a long time. The only sound was the wind. "My name is Sarah," she said finally. "I am Kai." The introduction hung in the air, simple and heavy. "Why?" she asked. He knew what she meant. Why help her? Why kill for her? He looked away, out over the vast, empty landscape. "The men," he said. "They were, I do not like such men." It was a vast understatement. It was as close to the truth as he could come. She seemed to understand. She pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing as her ribs protested. What they did my family." She began to speak. Her voice was low, and it broke often. She told him of her family, her father, a white trader, her mother, a dying woman from the 2 rivers. They had a small ranch, a place where 2 worlds had tried to meet. They had been tolerated, until they were not. She spoke of the men, not just the 3 in the arroyo. There were more, a group. They had come, their faces filled with hate, talking about cleansing the land, about a pure race. They had burned the ranch. Her father had fought. Her mother had told her to run. "I ran," she whispered, and the shame in her voice was a mirror of his own. "I ran, and I did not look back. I heard the shots. I ran." She had been running for days. The 3 men had caught her. They had been playing with her. Kai listened. He felt the ice around his heart crack. Her story was his. The names were different. The faces were different. But the fire was the same. The ash was the same. The guilt was the same. He found himself speaking. He did not mean to. The words just came, forced out by the pressure of her own confession. "I lost my family," he said. His voice was flat. "My wife, my son, soldiers, no, not soldiers. Men like yours. They came at dawn. I fought. I was struck. When I woke, I was alone. I buried them, and I walked away." He had never told this to anyone. He had never spoken the words aloud. They tasted like poison. Sarah watched him, her eyes filled with a terrible, shared understanding. This was their bond. Not kindness, not attraction. It was a shared, gaping wound. They were two survivors, two runners, who had stumbled into each other in the wilderness. "The man who ran," Kai said, his voice hardening. "He will bring the others." "Yes," she said. She was trembling. "They will not stop. They cannot be stopped." "Who are they?" Kai asked. "You said they are a group." "They call themselves the Sons of Redemption." She said, "They follow one man. He is the one who leads them. He is the one who gives the orders. He is the one who—" She could not finish. Kai waited. He felt a cold dread begin to creep up his spine. "They say he was a soldier once." Sarah continued, her voice barely audible. "But the army cast him out. They said he was too cruel, even for them. He knows this land. He knows the people. He hates us. He hates all of us. The Dine, the ones who trade with them, the ones who live with them. He wants to wipe us all from the earth." Kai felt a memory surface, a face, a voice, a man in a blue uniform, but with eyes that were not a soldier's, eyes that were dead and filled with a hateful fire, a man he had seen during the wars, a man known for his brutality, a man who had vanished. "What is his name?" Kai asked. He already knew. He just needed to hear her say it. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide. "They call him Tabor." Kai stood up. He walked to the edge of the overhang, his knuckles white as he gripped the rifle he had taken. The name echoed in the chambers of his memory. Tabor. He had led a volunteer militia. He had been at the massacre at Canyon de Chelly. He had been there. He had been one of them. Kai looked out at the vast, silent desert. It was not an accident. He had not stumbled into this woman's trouble. He had been walking toward his own past all along. The man who had escaped was not just bringing back renegades. He was bringing back Kai's old enemy. He was no longer just a protector. He was a target, and he had just given the hunter a perfect, stationary bait. The name Tabor settled in the air like a layer of alkali dust, gritty and toxic. Kai felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the desert night. He had been running from a ghost, and now that ghost had a name, a face, and a direction. The man who had fled the arroyo was a living arrow, pointing Tabor straight toward this ridge. "We leave," Kai said. The words were flat, final. Sarah pushed herself into a sitting position, her face tight with pain and a new, sharper fear. "Now, in the dark, I am not strong. They will be here by morning, maybe sooner," Kai said. He was already moving, his motions economical and swift. He kicked dirt onto the small fire, extinguishing the last embers. He scattered the ashes with his foot. He bundled his few possessions, the bedroll, the pot, the cured skins, into a tight roll. Tabor knows this land. He knows how to track. He will find this place. "I will slow you down," she whispered. The shame was back in her voice. The shame of the victim. The burden. Kai stopped. He turned to her in the deep twilight. He could barely see her face, just the dark ovals of her eyes. "Yes," he said. It was a cruel truth, but there was no time for lies. "You will. Get up." He went to her. He did not offer his hand. He simply bent and slid his arm behind her back, the other under her knees, and lifted her as he had before. She gasped, her ribs aching, but she did not protest. She was a burden, and he was the man to carry it. This was their new reality. He slung his pack and bow over one shoulder, the two rifles over the other, laden with weapons and the woman. He stepped off the ledge and into the broken darkness. Their flight was a special kind of hell. Kai was a man of the desert, and he knew how to move. He knew the paths that left no trace, the game trails that wound through the thorn and rock. But he could not move fast. He could not move silently. He was carrying her. He carried her for an hour, his muscles burning, until he found a deep, sandy wash that would hide their tracks. He set her down. "You must walk now, as much as you can. Walk in the sand." She nodded, her face pale in the moonlight. She stood, wavering on her feet. He gave her one of the rifles to use as a walking staff. She leaned on it, her steps hesitant and uneven. He walked behind her, his own feet carefully placed, his eyes and ears straining, scanning the ridges above them. Every shadow was a threat. Every falling rock was an enemy. Kai was at war, not just with the men who were coming, but with himself. With every step, his guilt was a physical weight, heavier than the woman, heavier than the rifles. He was doing it. He was running, hiding, protecting. He was being the man he should have been for Allah and TSO. And the thought was agony. Why her? Why this stranger? This woman of mixed blood with shame in her eyes? Why had the spirits, or the cruel joke of fate, allowed him to fail his own blood and then demanded he risk his life for hers? He felt a bitter, useless rage. He was a man performing a heroic act, and he hated every second of it. He hated her for needing him. He hated himself for failing the ones who had needed him more. They walked until the moon was high, and Sarah was trembling so violently she could no longer stand. She stumbled, and the rifle clattered on the rocks. Kai grabbed her before she fell. He held her up. Her breathing was a painful rasp. "I cannot," she sobbed, the sound muffled against his chest. "I cannot. Leave me." "Be silent," he commanded, his voice harsh. He lifted her again. He would carry her. He would carry this cross. He did not know why. He only knew that leaving her was the one thing he could not do. It was the one failure that would be worse than the last. He found a place before dawn. It was a crack in the rock, a narrow fissure that was invisible from more than 10 feet away. He slid them both inside. It was cramped. They were pressed together, his back against one wall, hers against his front. There was no room for a fire. There was no room for comfort. There was only shared body heat and the smell of fear. They sat in silence for a long time. The first gray light of dawn touched the canyon outside, illuminating a sliver of the world. "They are hunting," she said, her voice small. "We are hiding," he replied. He gave her water from the canteen. He gave her a piece of the dried meat he had taken from the dead man. She chewed it slowly, with great effort. "My father," she said, her voice a near whisper. He was a good man. He was from the East. He came here for the sky. He used to say you could breathe out here, really breathe. He met my mother at a trading post. He said he had never seen anyone so still, so certain." Kai listened. He did not want to. He did not want her to have a father, a mother, a history. He wanted her to be a symbol, a burden he could carry and then set down. But the words came, and they painted pictures in the dark. Our ranch, it was not much. A small house of adobe. He built it himself. My mother planted corn. And he had a garden, with flowers. He brought the seeds from the east, bright red and yellow flowers. They looked strange, so bright against the dust. He said they reminded him of his home. She laughed, a small, broken sound. My mother, she thought they were a waste of water, but she let him keep them. She would weave, the way of the people. Our house was filled with her rugs, and his books. She paused, lost in the memory. It was a quiet life. I did not know it was wrong. I did not know it was hateful. To them, to Tabor. "It was not wrong," Kai said, his voice a low growl. "It was theirs. Tabor came once, before, with some men. They said they were looking for lost cattle. My father gave them water. He was a kind man. He offered them food. Tabor, he looked at my mother. He looked at me. His eyes, I felt dirty. I felt like I was an animal. He looked at my father's books and my mother's loom. He smiled. He said to my father, 'You have built a strange nest out here, old man.' And my father, he said. "It is my home." Tabor just laughed. "When he rode away, my mother said we should leave. She said that man's spirit was sick. She said he was a ghost walker, a man who fed on pain. But my father, he would not. He said this was our land. He had built it. He would not run." Her voice broke. "But I did. He told me to run. Sarah, do not look back. Live. He gave me his strength, and I ran, and I hate myself for it." Kai felt her body shake against his. He felt her shame, her guilt. It was so close to his own. It was like breathing the same air. But he said nothing. He could not. He had no comfort to offer. He was a well of grief, and he had nothing to draw. When the sun was high, he slipped out of the crevice, leaving her hidden. "Do not move! Do not make a sound!" He climbed the canyon wall, moving like a lizard, until he could see the land around them. He lay on his stomach, watching. He saw them. They were far off, just dots in the heat shimmer, but they were there, riders. 12 of them. They were at his old camp on the ledge. He saw them milling about, tiny figures, angry and frustrated. They were fanned out, searching. They had a tracker, a small man who was bent low to the ground. TBC, they would find the trail from the arroyo. They would follow it to the camp, and from the camp they would find the trail of 2 people, one of whom was injured. He slid back down the rock and returned to the fissure. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with a question she was too afraid to ask. "They are here," he said. "They found the camp. They are searching." The last bit of color drained from her face. "He will find us." "Yes, we cannot stay here. We must move again. Tonight." They spent the day in the suffocating heat of the narrow space, pressed close. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of their breathing. He was acutely aware of her, the feel of her hair against his chin, the way her body tensed every time a rock skittered outside. This forced intimacy was a new kind of torture. He was bound to her, physically and in spirit. That night, they moved again. The second day was worse than the first. Sarah was weaker. The gash on her arm was inflamed, and her ribs made every breath a new pain. He carried her more than she walked. He was driven by a cold, grim determination. He was not just running from Tabor. He was running from his own past. He would not fail again. He would not be the man who woke up alone in the ashes. They found a new shelter, a shallow cave hidden behind a waterfall of ancient, dried-up travertine. It was high on a cliff face, accessible only by a narrow, dangerous path. It was a good place, a place to make a stand, if it came to that. Inside, Kai finally allowed a small, smokeless fire. He had to redress her wound. He heated water. As he untied the crude bandage, he saw the angry red of the infection. He swore, a low, bitter sound. "It is bad," she said. It was not a question. "It needs medicine," he said. He had none. He had only the desert. He went outside and returned with a handful of pungent, gray-green leaves, sage. He crushed them between 2 stones and made a poultice. It was all he could do. He applied the crushed leaves to the wound. She hissed, her body going rigid. "It stings," she gasped. "That is the poison leaving," he said. He sat back. The fire cast flickering shadows on the cave walls. They were safe. For a few hours. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak on both of them. Sarah watched him. He was staring into the fire, but his eyes were not seeing it. His face was a map of old pain, of a grief so deep it had become a part of his bones. He was a man hollowed out. "Tell me about them," she said, her voice soft. Kai's head snapped up. His eyes were cold. "What?" "Your family," she said, her voice not wavering. "You told me you lost them. You did not tell me who they were." He looked at her. A long, hard stare. He wanted to tell her to be silent. He wanted to tell her it was none of her concern. But he saw the look in her eyes. It was not curiosity. It was not pity. It was the look of a fellow mourner. She was asking him to share the weight, not because she was strong, but because she was already carrying her own. He looked back at the fire. The words came, hard and stiff, like stones pulled from frozen earth. Her name was Allah, he said. She was a weaver. Her hands, they were never still. Always making. She hummed when she worked. He stopped, the memory of that sound tightening his throat. She was a quiet woman, but she saw everything. She knew what I was thinking before I did. She was my center. He picked up a stick and pushed it into the fire. My son, he was TSO. He was small, but he had the heart of a bear. He had his mother's eyes. Serious. He was learning the bow. I was teaching him. He loved to watch the hawks. He said he would fly with them one day. The stick in his hand snapped. He threw the pieces into the flames. They came at dawn, he said, and now his voice was dead. The voice of the ghost he had been. I had fought in the wars. I knew the signs. I should have known, but we were at peace. I had let myself believe in peace. They were not soldiers. They were men like Tabor's. They came with fire. There were too many. I was not enough. I fought. I killed 3, but they struck me. He touched the scar on his temple, hidden by his hair. I fell, and when I woke up the world was gone. The Hugin was burning. The sky was black, and they were... He could not say it. He stood up abruptly and walked to the mouth of the cave, his back to her. His shoulders were rigid. I found them in the ashes, he said, his voice a rasp. I buried them, and I ran, just like you. I ran. I have been running ever since. I am a warrior who failed to protect his family, a man who failed his wife and son. And I lived. I should have died with them. He hit the wall of the cave, his fist striking the stone, a sharp, dry sound of bone on rock. And now, he said, his voice thick with a self-loathing that was suffocating. Now I am here, hiding in a cave, protecting a stranger. It is a joke. It is a bitter joke. He waited for her to say something, to offer pity, to cry. He heard her move. He felt her presence behind him. She did not touch him, not at first. You lived, Kai, she said, her voice as quiet as the stone walls. That is not your shame. That is your burden, just as it is mine. He felt her hand, small and hesitant, touch his arm. It was not a plea. It was not a demand. It was just a touch, a connection, one living, breathing person reaching out to another in the dark. He did not pull away. He stood there, frozen, as the fire crackled behind them. He felt the warmth of her hand through his shirt. It was the first human kindness he had felt in a year. It was terrible, and it was essential. It was the one thing that might save him. Kai's body went rigid at her touch. For a full, long second, he stood frozen, a statue of stone at the mouth of the cave. He felt the warmth of her hand, a small point of heat on the cold emptiness of his arm. It was a brand. It was a claim. It was everything he had been running from. He pulled his arm away. The motion was not violent, but it was sharp and absolute. A rejection. Do not, he said. His voice was a low rasp. Sarah let her hand fall to her side. The hurt was plain on her face, but it was immediately replaced by something harder. The softness of the shared confession was gone, evaporated by his recoil. The moment of peace was broken. She was no longer a fellow mourner. She was a survivor, and she was looking at her only tool. Do not what? She challenged him, her voice quiet but gaining a rough edge. Do not touch you, do not talk to you, do not remind you that I am alive. Your wife and son are dead. Kai, I am not, and I do not intend to be. Her words were stones, and they struck him hard. He turned to face her, his eyes dark with a pain so deep it looked like anger. You know nothing. I know everything, she retorted, pushing herself up to sit taller against the cave wall, her wince of pain lost in her sudden fire. I know what it is to run. I know what it is to be hunted, and I know what a killer looks like. I saw one in the arroyo. He saved my life. And now I see a man who is so busy mourning the dead, he is going to let the living die right beside him. I am protecting you, he snarled. I brought you here. I am tending your wound. I am here. You are hiding, she said, and you are hiding me with you. It is not enough. He is coming. Tabor. You said his name. You know him. You know he will not stop. Running is not protecting. It is just dying slowly. It is dying tired. A terrible silence filled the cave. Kai looked at this woman, this stranger. She had, in the space of 2 days, burrowed under his skin, into the sacred, hollow place he had reserved for his grief. And now she was demanding he tear that place down and build a fortress for her. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, the question an admission of his own exhaustion. "I want the man from the arroyo," she said, her voice flat and cold. "I do not want the grieving husband. I do not want the ghost who hits the wall. I want the warrior. I want the man who put an arrow in that man's throat without making a sound. I need him." He felt sick. He hated that man. That man was the part of him that lived in blood and instinct, the part that had failed in the end. That man is what I am running from. "Then stop running," she cried, her voice cracking. "Stop running from him, and stop running from Tabor. I am asking you, I am begging you, protect me. You said you would, but that means stopping him, not just running, stopping him, for good, at any cost." At any cost. The words echoed his own loss, the cost of his failure, the cost of his survival. She was asking him to put a price on her life and pay it with the blood of his oldest enemy. He had no answer. He was a man split in two, the warrior and the mourner, and they were at war inside him. He turned away from her, his insides churning. I need to know where they are." "Kai," she started, her voice now uncertain, afraid she had pushed too hard. "Stay in the cave," he commanded, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Do not light the fire. Do not leave. For any reason." He picked up his bow and the quiver. He left the rifles. They were loud. He was a man of silence. He slipped out of the cave entrance, disappearing into the blinding white light of the high noon sun. He moved across the rock, a shadow. His senses were alive, every nerve tingling. The debate in the cave had sharpened him, scraped him raw. He was no longer just a man moving through the desert. He was a man with a question to answer. And the answer was out here. He climbed to a high pinnacle, a needle of rock that overlooked the vast, broken maze of canyons. From here, he could see for miles. He lay flat on the hot stone, his skin pressed to the ancient rock. He watched. He waited. For an hour, nothing moved. The desert was a painted backdrop, lifeless and still. Then he saw them. They were not dots in the distance. They were close. They were in the canyon just below his, perhaps 2 miles away. He counted 10, 11, 12 riders. They were moving slowly, fanned out. He saw the man who had escaped. He was riding beside the leader. And the leader, Kai, would have known him anywhere. He was a large man, broad in the shoulder, and he sat his horse like a king on a throne of bones. He wore a dusty black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. But the sun caught him as he turned his head, and Kai saw the face he remembered from his nightmares. The heavy jaw, the pale, cold eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Tabor! He was not a ragged renegade. He was a commander. His men were not a rabble. They were a disciplined pack of wolves. They moved with purpose. They were searching the canyon walls, checking every crack, every shadow. Kai watched as Tabor halted the group. He pointed to the ground. He was a tracker himself. He dismounted, kneeling. Kai was too far to see what he had found, perhaps a scuffed bit of rock from their passage, a broken branch. Tabor stood, and he looked up. He did not look at Kai's position. He looked at the terrain. He was reading the land. reading the mind of his prey. Kai knew exactly what he was doing. He was thinking, if I were a man hiding an injured woman, where would I go? Where is the water? Where is the defensible shelter? Tabor gestured. He sent 2 men up a side canyon. He sent 2 more to climb the eastern ridge. He was not just following a trail. He was closing a net. He knew he was hunting someone who knew the land. The man who had escaped must have described Kai, a warrior, fast, silent, deadly, and Tabor, who had spent years pacifying this very territory, who had presided over the slaughter of Kai's people, would know what that meant. He might not know his name was Kai, but he knew he was hunting one of the people, a warrior who had survived. And for Tabor, a man who believed in cleansing the land, this was not just a pursuit, it was unfinished business. It was extermination. And Kai felt a cold, clear hatred rise in him. It was different from his grief. Grief was a fog, heavy and blinding. This was a piece of ice, sharp and focused. This was the man. This was the symbol of the fire, the ash, the screams. This was the man who had walked through the ruins of his life and laughed. And he was hunting him. He was hunting Sarah. The internal war was over. The warrior had won. Kai did not wait to watch them find him. He slid backward off the pinnacle, his movements sure and quick. He made his way back to the cave, a different man from the one who had left it. He entered the small, dark space. Sarah was huddled where he had left her, her face pale, her eyes enormous in the gloom. She saw his face and needed to ask no questions. "He is close," Kai said. He walked past her and picked up one of the rifles. He checked the load. "They are in the next canyon. They have a tracker. Tabor is with them. He is closing the net." Sarah's breath hitched. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ribs. She came to him, grabbing the front of his shirt, just as she had in the arroyo. Her terror was a physical force. "Then we run. We run now. We can go north, into the high rocks. You can carry me." "No." He looked down at her hands, then at her face. "He is not a fool. He has men on the ridges. We are trapped." Then what?" she whispered, her voice failing. "What do we do?" He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. They were not the eyes of the ghost. They were not the eyes of the grieving husband. They were the eyes of the man from the arroyo. Cold, certain, deadly. "You asked me to protect you," he said. "Yes," she breathed. "You asked me to stop him, at all costs." "Yes, Kai, please." He put his hand over hers, his grip hard, stilling her trembling. "I am not running again." She stared at him, not understanding. "I am going to stop him," Kai said. His voice was flat. "I am going to stop them. Here." She could not process it. "Here, but there are 12 of them, Kai. You cannot. It is suicide. They will kill you. They will." "They will try," he said. He released her hands and turned to his weapons. He laid them out on the rock, his bow, his quiver, the 2 rifles, the ammunition, his knife. It was a pitiful arsenal against 12 armed men. But he was not a soldier. He was a hunter, and this was his ground. You are doing this," she whispered, a strange mix of terror and awe in her voice. For me." Kai paused. He looked at the bow in his hands. He thought of his son, TSO, his small hand trying to hold it steady. He thought of Allah, humming by the fire. He thought of the smoke and the ash. He turned to look at her. Her face was dirty, her hair tangled, her body bruised and broken. She was life. She was the living. She was the one who was here. Now, he owed her his protection. He had given his word. But as he looked at her, he saw the faces of his dead. He was not just protecting her. He was avenging them. He was using her, this living, breathing woman, as the whetstone to sharpen his long dormant rage. He was going to war, for her and for himself. It was a complex, layered, and dangerous truth. "Stay in the back of the cave," he said, his voice hard as iron. Put your hands over your ears. Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear, do not come out. Not until I come for you. Do you understand?" She was crying, silent tears tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. She nodded. "You stay," he said to her, echoing her own words from the arroyo. But this time, it was not a plea. It was a command. He picked up his bow and slipped out of the cave. He was no longer Kai, the mourner. He was no longer the ghost. He was the warrior, and he was going to hunt. Kai moved from the cave like smoke. The sun was a hammer, and the rock was an anvil. The heat was suffocating. He left Sarah in the deep gloom, her pale, terrified face the last thing he saw. His command to her was absolute, and he knew she would obey. She was a survivor. She knew how to hide. Now, he had to be a killer. He did not go far. The path to the cave was their only true advantage. It was a narrow, treacherous track, barely wide enough for one man, with a sheer drop of 100 feet to the canyon floor below. It was a bottleneck, a perfect, deadly bottleneck. He found his place, a small alcove in the rock, 20 yards from the cave entrance, hidden by a curtain of dried, ancient vines. It gave him a clear view of the final 50 feet of the path. He settled in, he knocked an arrow, and he waited. His breathing slowed. His heart, which had been pounding with a mix of rage and fear, settled into a low, cold rhythm. He was the man in the arroyo again. He was the warrior. He was not thinking of Allah. He was not thinking of TSO. He was thinking of the angle of the sun. He was thinking of the wind. He was thinking of the woman in the cave behind him. He was protecting his home. It was a strange, bitter thought. This hole in the rock, his home. He waited for an hour. The silence of the desert was profound. Then he heard it, the scrape of a boot on rock, far below, the clink of a canteen, the low murmur of a voice. They were here. He drew the bowstring back. He held the breath. The first man appeared. He was not one of the men from the arroyo. This man was hard. He wore a cavalry jacket, stripped of its insignia. He held his rifle at the ready. He was a scout. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning every shadow. He passed Kai's position. He was moving toward the cave. A second man followed, just as cautious. Kai waited. He let them get almost to the cave entrance. He let them feel a moment of false confidence. They were close. They signaled back to the men below. Kai released the breath. The arrow flew. It made no sound. The first man simply stopped. He looked down at the fletching protruding from his chest, his eyes wide with a look of absurd surprise. He did not cry out. He simply folded, his rifle clattering on the rock, and then he pitched forward, tumbling into the void. The second man spun, raising his rifle, but he did not know where to shoot. He shouted a sharp, aborted cry. "Tabor MB." Kai's second arrow took him in the throat. He gargled, his fingers clawing at the shaft. And then he, too, fell, his body bouncing off the cliff face before disappearing. Silence. Then, from below, a roar of pure, undiluted rage. "Assault! Assault! He's in the rocks. He's one man. Get up there. I want the girl. I want her alive." "Tabor!" The battle began. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. Men, driven by Tabor's fury, began to scramble up the narrow path. They were not cautious. They were angry. Kai dropped his bow. He grabbed the first rifle. He leaned out from his cover. A man was charging up the path. Kai fired. The sound was a deafening crack, a thunderclap in the narrow space. The man was thrown backward, a red stain blossoming on his shirt. He fell. Another came. Kai fired again. The man screamed and fell, clutching his leg, but the man behind him pushed him off the path, clearing the way. They were coming. Inside the cave, Sarah was pressed against the back wall, her hands clamped over her ears. It was useless. The sound was not just a noise, it was a physical force. a vibration that shook the very bones of the mountain. The roar of the rifles, the shouts, the screams, the thwack, thwack, thwack of bullets striking the rock near the cave entrance. She was paralyzed by a terror so complete it was almost a numbness. She was back at her ranch. She was hearing the shots. She was running. But this time, she could not run. She had to see. She did not know why. She crawled forward, her body screaming in protest, until she could peek around the edge of the cave mouth. She saw him. He was not a man. He was a force of nature. He was crouched on the ledge, firing, reloading, firing, his movements a blur of deadly efficiency. He was exposed. Bullets were chipping the rock all around him, sending fragments of stone stinging against his face. He did not flinch. He did not waver. He was a wall of death, holding back the tide. She saw 2 more men fall. The path was becoming choked with them. But more were coming. 3 at once. This time, they were smarter. 1 man stayed back, laying down a rain of covering fire, while the other 2 charged. Bullets hammered Kai's position. He was forced to pull back, ducking behind the stone. The 2 men were on him. He dropped the rifle. It was too slow. He drew his knife as they rounded the bend. The first man lunged, his face a mask of hate. Kai met him, not with force, but with a fluid motion. He turned the man's lunge, using his own momentum, and the knife went in, under the ribs. The man grunted, his eyes rolling back. The second man was bigger. He swung his rifle like a club. Kai was still entangled with the first man. He could not dodge in time. The heavy wooden stock caught him high on the shoulder. Pain exploded in his arm, a white-hot agony that almost made him black out. He stumbled, falling back against the cliff face. Sarah screamed. She saw him hit. She saw him falter. She saw the blood, a dark, wet stain spreading on his buckskin shirt. He looked tired. The fury was gone, replaced by a grim exhaustion. He was 1 man. He was hurt, and they were still coming. Down below, Tabor saw it all. He had lost 6 men, 6 to 1 man. The rage in him was a physical thing, a sickness. This was not a savage. This was a ghost. This was one of the warriors he thought he had exterminated. "Pin him!" Tabor bellowed. He was done wasting men. He turned to the 2 men beside him. "We go over. You 2, with me. The rest of you, keep him busy." Tabor spurred his horse away from the base of the path. He and his 2 men dismounted and began to move toward a different part of the cliff face, a place that looked unscalable. But Tabor knew this land. He knew the hidden handholds, the ancient trails. He was going to get above the cave. Kai did not see it. He was breathing heavily, his left arm a searing fire. He was pinned. The men below were firing steadily, keeping him trapped. He could not move. He could only wait. But Sarah saw it. From the blackness of the cave, she had a different angle, a small, natural fissure in the rock. A tiny window to the outside world gave her a sliver of a view of the canyon wall to the east. She saw them, 3 figures, climbing, moving like spiders. Tabor! They were going above. They were going to get over the cave. They were going to trap Kai. They would shoot him from above. He would be fish in a barrel. Her heart stopped. Everything vanished. The fear, the pain in her ribs, the memory of her father, the memory of running. All of it was burned away in a single, clarifying blast of pure, white-hot terror. She was going to watch him die. This man who had saved her, this man who had listened to her story, this man who had shared his own unbearable grief, this man whose body, pressed against hers in the darkness, had been the only warmth in a dead world. She realized, with the force of a physical blow, that her life was no longer just her own. It was bound to his. It was entangled. The thought of him dying, of his body falling from that ledge, was more unbearable than her own death. This was not survival. This was not gratitude. This was love. A raw, desperate newborn thing, as wild and as fierce as the desert itself. And she would not let him die. She looked at the rifle Kai had left, the second rifle. It was loaded. He had loaded it. Her father had tried to teach her. A woman in this land needs to know this, Sarah, he had said, holding out the heavy rifle. She had hated it, hated the smell of the oil, the terrible, deafening sound. She had refused. Now, she would give her soul to have listened. Her hands were shaking. She picked it up. It was heavy, so heavy. The men below were still firing. Kai was pressed flat against the rock, his knife in his good hand, waiting for the next rush. He was a trapped animal. Sarah crawled to the mouth of the cave. The air was thick with gunpowder. Bullets were whining past the opening, just inches away. She ignored them. "Kai!" she screamed. He did not hear her. The world was a symphony of gunfire. Tabor and his men were almost in position. "Kai!" She saw him glance back, his face a mask of sweat and blood, his eyes confused. "Above you!" she shrieked. He looked up. He saw them. He saw Tabor 100 feet up, leveling his rifle down. He was trapped. There was no cover from above. "No," Sarah whispered. She did not think. She acted. She scrambled out of the cave, onto the open ledge. She was in the open. A target. "Sarah, get back! Get back in!" Kai roared. His voice was a sound of pure, primal terror. He lunged for her, to drag her back. But she was already moving. She did not aim at Tabor. She could never make that shot. She aimed at the men below, the men who were pinning Kai. She lifted the rifle. She braced it against her hip. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The explosion was colossal. The recoil was a physical blow, slamming her back against the cave wall, knocking the wind from her. The rifle flew from her hands. She did not care. The shot was wild. It hit nothing, but it did its job. The men below, stunned by this new, unexpected shooter, ducked. They ceased firing. It was the 1 second Kai needed. As Tabor fired from above, Kai was already moving. The bullet that would have taken him in the heart splintered the rock where he had been. Kai fired his own rifle, not at Tabor, but at the rock just beside his head. The chip of stone and lead ricocheted, forcing Tabor to duck back. It bought them 3 seconds. Kai grabbed Sarah. He hauled her to her feet and dragged her bodily, stumbling, back toward the cave. I told you to stay inside," he was shouting, his voice a mix of fury and relief. She collapsed against him, burying her face in his bloody shirt, sobbing. He was above you. I saw him. He held her. For one single, impossible moment, he held her. His body was a shield. He smelled the gunpowder in her hair. He felt her small body trembling against his. It was not the trembling of a victim. It was the trembling of a fighter. He felt her love, her terror, her strength. It was a tangible thing, a living fire. He pushed her, not into the cave, but behind a thick spur of rock near the entrance. "Stay here behind this, do not move." Tabor was shouting orders from above. The men below, recovering from their shock, were renewing the assault. They were coming again. They were trapped, attacked from above and below. Kai looked at Sarah. She was huddled behind the rock. She was crying, but she was watching him. Her eyes were no longer the eyes of the girl in the arroyo. They were the eyes of a woman who had just stepped into the fire. "You stay," she whispered. Her voice was fierce, a command, a prayer. "You stay. Do not leave me, Kai. Do not die." He looked at her. The world went still. The shouting, the gunfire, the pain in his arm. It all faded. He saw her, not as a burden, not as a ghost of his past. He saw her, the reason, the living, the future. He was done avenging his dead. He was now fighting for his life, for their life. He gave her a single, sharp nod. It was a promise. He turned, his face a set, cold mask. He picked up the rifle. He looked up at the ridge. "Tabor," he roared. The name was a challenge, an earthquake. "Come finish this." He stepped out, away from the protection of the cave, and fired up at the ridge. The battle was not over. It had just changed. Kai's roar was an act of defiance, a challenge hurled at the uncaring sun. "Tabor!" The name echoed, bouncing off the canyon walls. A sound of pure, primal rage. He stepped clear of the cave, his rifle to his good shoulder. From the ridge above, Tabor's answer was a muzzle flash. A bullet sang past Kai's ear, so close it felt like a hot breath. Kai did not flinch. He fired back, not at Tabor, but at the rock just below him, sending a shower of stone fragments up into his face. Tabor cursed, ducking back. "He's all yours. Get up there, finish him!" The men on the path below, who had been pinned by Kai's deadly fire, took the order. They saw Kai exposed, dueling with the man above. This was their chance. The last 4 of them charged, a desperate, screaming wave of men. Kai spun, dropping his empty rifle and drawing his knife with his good hand. He was a cornered wolf, his left arm a useless, burning weight. Sarah, huddled behind the rock spur, watched in heart-stopping terror. The men were almost on him. "Kai!" she screamed. He met the first man's charge. The man was big, but clumsy with haste. Kai used his own momentum, sidestepping, and his knife found the soft place under the man's arm. The man grunted, his eyes wide, and stumbled past. The second man was right behind him. He swung his pistol like a club. Kai tried to duck, but his wounded shoulder made him slow. The heavy barrel glanced off the side of his head. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He went down to one knee, the world spinning in a red haze. He was vaguely aware of Sarah screaming his name. The man stood over him, raising his pistol for a killing blow. A shot cracked the air. It was not from Tabor. It was not from Kai. The man over him stiffened, a hole appearing in his chest. He looked down, confused, and then toppled backward, falling from the ledge into the empty air. Kai shook his head, clearing the fog. He looked back. Sarah. She was on her knees, the heavy rifle in her lap, its barrel smoking. She had done it again. She had saved him, but she was exposed. The third man, seeing his companion fall, turned his rifle on her. "No!" Kai bellowed. He launched himself from his knees, his body screaming, tackling the man at the waist. They went down in a brutal tangle of limbs. The man's rifle discharged, the bullet plowing harmlessly into the stone. Kai's knife was a blur. It was fast. It was final. He rolled, coming to his feet, breathing like a winded bull. He was covered in blood, his own and others. He turned. The fourth man had stopped, his nerve broken. He was 10 feet away, fumbling to reload his rifle, his eyes wide with the terror of a man who has seen a ghost. Kai did not give him the chance. He threw his knife. The heavy blade spun once, an arc of silver in the sun, and buried itself in the man's throat. The man dropped his rifle, his hands clutching the hilt, and collapsed. Silence. The path was clear. It was done. But it was not. "Impressive. Ghost." Tabor's voice, amplified by the canyon, came from above. "Impressive." Kai turned, his good hand empty, reaching for the rifle he had dropped. He was too slow. A man stepped out from the shadows near the cave, not from the path, from the side. One of Tabor's 2 men from the ridge. He had climbed down while Kai was fighting. He held a pistol, and it was aimed straight at Kai's head. "Do not move." Kai froze. He was caught. His knife was gone. His rifle was out of reach. He was bleeding from his shoulder and his head. "Got him, boss!" the man yelled up, a triumphant grin on his face. From the ridge, Tabor stood, his own rifle leveled. He was not smiling. "Hold him. I want this one to see me." Tabor was going to execute him, right in front of Sarah. The man with the pistol took a step closer, his grin widening. "Told you we'd get him." A shot. Not from Tabor. The man's grin vanished. He looked down. A dark spreading stain was blossoming on his shirt. He looked at Kai, his expression one of profound, almost comical, disbelief. Then he crumpled to the ground. Kai spun around. Sarah. She was slumped against the rock, the rifle still smoking in her lap. Her eyes were wide, her face pale as ash. She had saved him, a third time. But she was not looking at him. She was looking at her side. A dark, wet patch was spreading across her dress. "Sarah," he breathed. One of the men from the path astray shot a ricochet. "Which?" The word was a shriek of pure fury from the ridge. Tabor, seeing his last man fall, seeing his victory turn to ash, raised his rifle. He was not aiming at Kai, he was aiming at her. Kai did not think, he moved. He threw his body in front of hers, a living shield. He felt the bullet. It was a sledgehammer. It struck his already wounded left shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him to the rock. The pain was beyond anything he had ever known. A white, blinding void. He heard Sarah scream his name. He collapsed at her feet, his vision tunneling. He could not move his arm. He could not feel it. He heard rocks skittering. He heard heavy breathing. He looked up. Tabor. Tabor was climbing down the last few feet to the ledge. He was alone. His face was a mask of thunder. He had lost all his men, all of them. He landed on the path, his heavy boots making a solid sound. He looked at the carnage. He looked at Kai, who was trying to push himself up with one arm and failing. He looked at Sarah, who was holding her side, her face slick with sweat. "I should have burned this whole canyon." Tabor growled, his voice low and shaking with rage. He walked over to Kai. He kicked Kai's fallen rifle off the ledge. He saw the knife in the last man's throat and sneered. He drew his pistol. He looked down at Kai. "You," he said, "are hard to kill." He raised the pistol. "But not impossible." "No," Kai whispered. "No," Tabor laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It is over, ghost." "No," Kai said again, and with a roar that came from the depths of his soul, he lunged. He did not lunge at Tabor. He lunged past him, at his legs. He was not trying to fight. He was trying to tackle. The move was pure desperation. Tabor, his pistol aimed, was not expecting it. Kai's one-armed lunge, powered by the last of his strength, struck Tabor's knees. Tabor stumbled. His pistol fired. The shot going wild, echoing down the canyon. He windmilled his arms, trying to keep his balance on the narrow ledge. "You!" He fell, but Kai, his arms entangled with Tabor's legs, fell with him. They went down together in a heap, grappling, rolling, inches from the sheer drop. Tabor was a brawler. He was immensely strong. He roared, punching Kai in the head with his free hand. But Kai was a snake. He was all sinew and desperation. His one good arm was locked on Tabor's pistol hand. "Die," Tabor grunted, forcing the barrel of the pistol down, toward Kai's face. Kai's arm was shaking. The pain from his shoulder was a universe. He could not hold him. He was... Tabor's body suddenly went rigid. A sound, a wet, tearing sound. Tabor's eyes went wide. The pressure on the pistol vanished. He made a choking, gurgling noise. He looked down, at his own chest, then at Kai. His expression no longer angry, just surprised. He slumped sideways. Kai pushed the heavy, inert body off him. Sarah was there. She was on her hands and knees, her face a mask of agony. In her two shaking hands, she held Kai's knife, the one she had pulled from the dead man's throat. She had crawled. While they were fighting, she had crawled. She had plunged it, with all her remaining strength, into Tabor's back. The world was suddenly, profoundly silent. There was only the sound of the wind. Tabor was not dead. He was on his back, his eyes open, staring at the sky. He was breathing, a wet, shallow sound. He was paralyzed, defeated. Kai looked at him for one long, cold second. Then he turned, crawling on his hands and knees, back to Sarah. "Sarah! Sarah!" He reached her. She collapsed against him, the bloody knife falling from her grasp. "Kai," she whispered. Her eyes were unfocused. The front of her dress was soaked. The bullet had gone deep. Shh, I have you. He held her, his one good arm wrapping around her. He was bleeding everywhere. His head, his shoulder. But he did not care. He held her. She is done for, ghost." Kai's head snapped up. "Tabor," he was laughing, a wet, choking sound. "And so are you. You will bleed out up here. With your—" Kai laid Sarah down. As gently as he could, he picked up the knife. He crawled, dragging his useless arm, dragging his wounded body, over to where his enemy lay. He loomed over him, the man who had burned his world, the symbol of his grief, the source of his nightmares. Helpless. "Finish it." Tabor wheezed, a bloody smile on his lips. "It is what you want. Send me to hell. Join your wife." Kai's hand tightened on the hilt. His arm was shaking. The rage, the hate. It was a white fire consuming him. This was justice. This was vengeance. This was the end. He raised the knife. He saw Allah's face. He saw TSO. Then he heard a sound, a small, ragged gasp. "Sarah." He turned his head. She was still breathing. She was alive. He looked back at Tabor, at the sneering, hateful, pathetic man. He looked at the knife in his hand. If he did this, what would he be? He would be Tabor. He would be a man who feeds on pain. He would be a killer, not a protector. Sarah had said, "You stay." He lowered the knife. "No," Kai said. Tabor's eyes widened. He could not believe it. "Coward!" he choked. "I am not you," Kai said. He tore a strip of cloth from Tabor's own shirt and jammed it, hard, into the wound in the man's back. It was not an act of mercy. It was an act of refusal. He turned his back on the dying man. He left him to the desert. He crawled back to Sarah. She was his only world. He had to stop the bleeding. He had to. He gathered her into his arms, his body screaming, and stumbled into the dark, safe embrace of the cave. He laid her on his bedroll. She was so pale. He was so weak. The battle was over. The cost had been everything. And now, a new battle had just begun. The cave was a pocket of sudden, profound silence. Outside, the wind whispered over the canyon rim, a high, lonely sound. It was the only sound, save for the ragged, agonizing gasp of their own breathing. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood and the sharp, sulfuric stink of spent gunpowder. Kai laid her down on his bedroll. She was so pale, her skin almost translucent. Her eyes were closed, her face a mask of pain, her small hand pressed tight against the weeping wound in her side. He knelt beside her. The world was a spinning, red-hazed tunnel. The pain in his left shoulder was not pain. It was a void, an absence. He could not feel his arm. It was a dead thing, a mangled piece of meat strapped to his body, and it was leaking his life into the dust. The gash on his head was pulsing in time with his heart, a hot, wet beat. He looked at her. He had to stop her bleeding. That was the only thought that mattered. He fumbled with one hand, his right hand, grabbing a strip of cloth from his pack. It was clumsy. He was clumsy. He was a one-armed, dying man. He pressed the cloth to her side. She cried out, a thin, sharp sound that tore at his soul. Her eyes flew open. They were dark, dilated, and swimming with shock. "It hurts," she whispered. "I know," he rasped. "Hold this. Hold it. Hard." She put her trembling hand over his, pressing the wad of cloth into the wound. Her blood was hot on his skin. He sat back on his heels, the cave tilting around him. He was so weak. He had never known such weakness. He had bled before, but this was different. This was an emptying. He heard a sound from outside, a low, wet groan. Tabor. He had forgotten, in the rush to get her to safety, he had forgotten the man on the ledge. A fresh wave of black, pure hatred surged through him. It was so strong it almost made him stand up. The man was still alive. The man who had burned his home. The man who had shot this woman. The man who had taken everything. He was out there, helpless, paralyzed, waiting. He looked at his knife, lying on the dusty floor where it had fallen from his belt. Kai. Her voice was barely a breath. He looked at her. He is still, she whispered, her eyes tracking his gaze to the knife. He is, Kai said. The word was a growl. You did not? No. The word was bitter, torn from his throat. He had made the choice, but he hated the choice. He hated the weakness of it. His family cried out for vengeance. His blood, his spirit, demanded it. He had failed them, and now he was failing them again by letting their killer breathe. Sarah saw it. She saw the war in his face. She saw the ghost of the warrior, still on the ledge, his hand raised to strike. She saw the hate. She let go of the bandage, her hand weak, and reached for him. Her fingers, sticky with her own blood, brushed his good arm. No, she whispered. Do not be him. He stared at her, his vision blurring. He is evil. He deserved. Yes, she breathed, her breath catching in a sob of pain. He did. But you do not deserve to carry him, to become him. He took my family, Kai said, the words raw, the confession of his deepest, darkest wound. He took Allah. He took TSO. And he took my father, she whispered. And my mother. He took everything, but he did not take us. Not yet. She coughed, a wet, terrible sound, and she grimaced, pressing her hand back to her side. Do not let him, she pleaded, her eyes searching his. Do not let him take you. To my father, he used to say that hate is a fire you light to burn your enemy, but it burns you first. It burns your own home. His own home. He saw it, the Hugin, the smoke, the flames leaping into the dawn sky. He had been living in that fire for a year, a cold fire, but it had consumed him all the same. He had been a man of ash. You saved me, she said, her voice a thread. You were a protector, in the arroyo, on the ledge. You fought for life. His life, it is over. Let him have it, but do not let his sickness be yours. Do not live with that, please. Her hand, which had been grasping his arm, fell away. Her strength was gone. Please, Kai, she whispered. You stay here, with me. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the grime, the sweat, the blood. He saw the ugly, puckered wound in her side. He saw the strength that had pulled that knife from a dead man's throat and plunged it into the back of a monster. He saw the woman who had stood in the open, in a hail of bullets, to fire a rifle she barely knew how to hold, just to give him 1 second of life. She had not run. The ice in his chest, the great cold stone of his grief that he had nurtured for so long, it did not just crack, it shattered. It dissolved into a hot, agonizing rush of something else. It was not just gratitude. It was not just duty. It was a profound, terrible, and beautiful connection. It was the love of the living, the desperate, clinging, broken love of two people who had nothing left in the world but each other. She had seen his soul, his rage, his failure, and she had not turned away. She had, with her dying breath, tried to save it. The ghosts of his past, of Allah and TSO, they were suddenly not demanding vengeance. He saw their faces, in his mind, and they were not angry. They were peaceful. They were releasing him. He had not failed them. He had honored them. He had survived. He had protected. He was free. He reached out his one good hand. It was shaking violently, from blood loss, from exhaustion, from the sheer, crushing weight of his emotion. He touched her face. His thumb, rough and dirty, brushed a tear from the corner of her eye. "Sarah," he said. It was the first time he had spoken her name as anything but a fact. He spoke it now as a prayer. She opened her eyes, which had begun to close. She tried to smile. You stayed." He leaned forward, his strength utterly gone. He rested his forehead against hers. He was crying, silent, hot tears that mixed with the blood and grime on his face. He was not a warrior. He was not a ghost. He was just a man, a broken, bleeding man in a cave, with a broken, bleeding woman. "I am here," he whispered, his voice thick. "I am here. I am not going anywhere." He felt a peace settle over him. The hate was gone. The rage was gone. There was only a vast, aching sadness and a small, determined flicker of life. Her life, his life. He pushed himself back up, his body screaming in protest. The world swam. He had to stop. He had to think. We are dying. Kai," she whispered. Her voice was fading. "No," he said. The word was a command. He tore another strip of cloth. "We are living. You understand, we are living." He looked at his own shoulder. It was a ruin. The second bullet had shattered what was left, but the bleeding, it was slowing. The pain was a sign of life. He focused on her. I have to. He had to get the bullet. He had no tools. He had no skill. He was not a doctor. Just water," she breathed. Water. He fumbled for the canteen. He lifted her head with his good arm, a feat of agonizing effort. He poured a few drops onto her cracked lips. She swallowed. He drank, too. The water was warm, but it was life. He looked at her wound again. He had to close it. He looked at the small fire, at the embers. He looked at his knife. This will be the last pain," he whispered. "Do you understand? I have to—" She was barely conscious, but she nodded. "Stay," she breathed. He took his knife. He heated the blade in the embers until it glowed a dull red. His hand was shaking. He could not do this. He thought of her, on the ledge, firing that rifle. He could do this. He pressed the hot blade to the edges of her wound. She did not scream. Her body arched, a silent, agonizing bow, and then she went limp. She was unconscious. But the bleeding had stopped. The flesh was seared. He sat back, panting, the world going black at the edges. He had done it. He heard the groan again. "Tabor!" Kai ignored it. He wrapped his useless, wounded arm tightly against his chest, binding it with his belt. He was so lightheaded. He was going to die here. No. He had made a choice. He had chosen life. For both of them. He would not fail. He would not fail again. He gathered her up. He put her limp, unconscious body over his one good shoulder. The pain was a supernova, a whiteout of all senses. He screamed, a low, guttural sound that was half agony, half defiance. He would not die. She would not die. He stumbled to his feet, the world lurching. He grabbed the canteen. He looked back at the cave, a place of death and rebirth. He turned and stumbled out onto the ledge, into the harsh, indifferent sunlight. Tabor was still there, 20 feet away, lying in a pool of his own filth. His eyes were open. He saw Kai. He saw him carrying the woman. Tabor tried to laugh. It was a wet, choking sound. Ghost going to die. Kai looked at him. He felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity. Just an emptiness. He had left that man behind. He was a stone. He was a part of the desert. And the desert would have him. No, Kai said, his voice clear. We are going to live. He turned his back on his enemy for the last time. He put one foot in front of the other, carrying her, carrying their future, down the treacherous path, away from the ghosts, and toward a life he had never thought he would have. The world was a tilted, spinning disk of white-hot sun and red rock. Kai walked. He did not know how long he walked. He was a machine, a thing made of pain and singular purpose. He had one good arm, and with it, he held on to her. He had draped her unconscious body over his right shoulder, a terrible, precious weight. His left arm, bound tight against his chest with his own belt, was a separate, dead thing, a source of such profound, radiating agony that it was no longer part of him. It was a dark star, and his consciousness was a small planet, spiraling into it. He walked down the path. He did not look back at the ledge. He did not look at the bodies. He did not look at Tabor, who he had left to the sky and the vultures. He had left the land of the dead behind him. He was, with every agonizing step, choosing the land of the living. Sarah was a dead weight. He could feel the sticky warmth of her blood seeping through her dress, through his own shirt. He could feel the small, shallow puff of her breath against his neck. It was the only thing that mattered, that small puff of air. He moved from memory. He had been through this high, broken country before. In the time of ghosts, he knew of a place, a hidden seep, a small spring, a place with water. It was his only destination. Water, life. His vision was a tunnel. The sun was a hammer. His good leg was strong, but the other, the one that had taken a glancing blow in the fight, was failing. He stumbled. He caught himself. He kept going. He thought of her words. You stay. It was a chant. It was a command. It was the only thing that kept his feet moving. You stay. You stay. You stay. He did not know when he fell. The red rock came up to meet him. The sun went black. He fell, twisting, his one good arm flying out to protect her body from the impact. He landed on his shattered left side. The pain was so vast, so absolute, that it was not pain. It was a final, blinding light. He heard a sound, a low groan, and realized it was his own. He lay there, pinned by her body, by his own weakness. He had failed. He had made it this far, only to die in the dust, 10 yards from the bodies of his enemies. He had chosen life, and life had rejected him. The irony was a bitter ash in his mouth. He closed his eyes. He thought of Allah. He thought of TSO. I am coming. He woke to a face. It was not Sarah. It was a face like a map, 1,000 wrinkles carved into dark, weathered skin. It was an old woman. Her black eyes, bright as a bird's, stared into his. She said nothing. He was moving. He was not walking. He was being carried. A travois, a simple stretcher. He was lying on it. He turned his head, a movement that sent a new explosion of pain through him. Sarah was there. She was on a second travois, beside him. She was still. Her face was the color of chalk, but she was breathing. 2 men, Dine, walked beside them. They were not warriors. They were older, their faces gaunt, their clothing simple. They were survivors. They had found them. Perhaps they had seen the smoke from the rifles. Perhaps they had seen the vultures circling, not for Tabor, but for them. Kai looked at the old woman who walked beside his litter. She put a hand on his good shoulder. It was a light touch, but it was an anchor. The girl, he rasped. His throat was raw. Is she? She breathes, the woman said. Her voice was like the wind in dry grass. Be silent. You are with the people. You are safe. He was safe. The word was alien. He had not been safe in a year. He closed his eyes. The blackness that took him this time was not death. It was rescue. His next memory was of fire. A fire in a hugin, a small, circular home of earth and logs. The air smelled of sage and cedar smoke, and something else, something sharp and medicinal. He was lying on a soft sheepskin. His shoulder was a universe of fire. A man was chanting, a low, rhythmic sound that was part of the earth. A hatali, a medicine man. He was kneeling beside Kai, his eyes closed, a rattle in his hand. Kai tried to move. He could not. "Be still, warrior," the medicine man said, his eyes still closed. "The ghost sickness is on you, the sickness of battle. We must cleanse it, and your body is broken." Kai looked down. His left arm was swaddled in thick bandages, bound tight with yucca fiber. It was still there. He looked across the Hugin. Sarah was there, on another pallet. The old woman was with her. She was wiping her face with a wet cloth. Sarah was muttering, her body twitching in a high fever. "Her," Kai whispered. "Help her." "She is being helped," the old woman said, not looking up. "She is strong, but the bullet sickness is in her. We will fight it." Kai fell back into the darkness. Time became a blur. It was a long, dark river of pain, fever dreams, and chanting. He would wake. He would see the fire. He would see the medicine man. He would see the old woman. He would see Sarah, a pale form in the shadows, sometimes sleeping, sometimes staring at the ceiling, her eyes wide with a terror that was not for the present. He drank broth. He swallowed bitter, herbal pastes. The medicine man worked on his shoulder. He sang the old songs, the songs of healing, the songs of protection. He worked with his hands, setting the shattered bones as best he could, his touch surprisingly gentle and immensely strong. "The arm will be a companion," the medicine man told him, in a moment of clear-headedness. "But it will not be a servant. The bullet sickness, the lead, it has poisoned the muscle. It has torn the spirit sinews. You will carry it, but it will not carry you." Kai understood. He was a one-armed man. The warrior who had lived by the bow, who had killed with the knife, was gone. He felt a profound grief, a loss that was almost as deep as the loss of his family. He had lost himself. And then he looked across the fire. Sarah was watching him. Her fever had broken. Her eyes were clear. She was weak. She was a skeleton, but she was alive. She did not look at his face. She looked at his bound, useless arm. She saw the grief in his eyes. He waited for her to look away, to feel pity. She did not. She just watched him, her gaze steady, full of a shared, terrible knowledge. They were two broken things. A week passed, then another. They were in a small, hidden settlement, a handful of Hugins tucked into a high, secret canyon, invisible from the desert floor. It was a place for the survivors, the ones who had hidden, the ones who had not gone to the forts. It was a village of remnants, of ghosts. And now, 2 more had joined them. The old woman's name was Sani. She was the matriarch. She had lost her own sons to the soldiers. She saw Kai and Sarah not as burdens, but as family returned. The first time Kai stood, the world spun. His left side was a dead weight, a terrible, awkward burden. He learned to walk again. He learned to balance. The first time Sarah sat up, she cried out as the seared muscles in her side pulled. But she did it. They found themselves sitting outside the Hugin in the late afternoon sun. It was spring. The high desert was coming alive with small, tough flowers. The air was clean. They sat in silence for a long time. They were 2 strangers, bound by a war that was over. The silence was not awkward. It was necessary. It was the sound of healing. "My arm," Sarah said finally, her voice soft. She touched the scar on her arm, the one he had cleaned in the arroyo. It healed. "Yes," he said. "My side." She touched the thick, puckered scar on her torso, just below her ribs. "Sani," she said, you burned it." "I did." "It was brave," she said. He shook his head. It was necessary. He looked at his own left arm, now free of the bandages. It was a road map of scars, the bullet holes puckered and angry, The arm was thin, the muscle already shrinking. He tried to move his fingers. They did not respond. The medicine man was right. It was a companion, a dead one. "I am sorry," she whispered. He looked at her. "Why?" Your arm. You were protecting me." You shot to protect me," he replied. 3 times. She looked down at her hands. "My father, he tried to teach me. I hated it." "You learned," Kai said, a small smile. The first in over a year, touched his lips. It felt strange. "You are a good shot." She looked up, startled, and she smiled back. It was a small, fragile thing, like the flowers at their feet. But it was real. "We are not fugitives anymore," she said, testing the words. "No, we are not." "Tabor." "He is with the desert," Kai said. "He is with the past. He is gone." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his, the hatred, the black fire he had carried. It was gone from his face. The man who sat beside her was not the ghost from the desert. He was not the warrior from the ledge. He was someone new. He was quiet. He was sad. But he was peaceful. "You let him go," she said. It was not a question. You told me to," he said. "You said hate burns the home." I said that," she asked, a frown of confusion. She did not remember. "You did." He looked at his hands. His one good hand. He was not a warrior. What was he? He was a man in a hidden village. A man with no family. A man with no future. What will we do?" "Kai," she asked. "Here," he said, surprising himself. "We will stay. Sani, she needs help. The men, they are old. I can work. With one arm, I can set traps. I can learn." He had been a man defined by his strength. Now, he would be defined by his endurance, by his mind. It was a terrifying and liberating thought. "And me?" she asked. I am not dying, not fully." "You are a survivor," he said. "You are Sarah. That is enough." The summer came. The heat was a blanket, but here, in the high canyon, there was a breeze. Life settled into a rhythm. Kai, his left arm now carried in a simple sling, He learned to set snares for rabbits with one hand. He learned to track again, not for enemies, but for food. He learned to repair the small check dams that held the precious water for the corn. The old men, who had seen his pain, respected his silence. They taught him. He was a good student. He was patient. Sarah healed. The color returned to her face. Her body, though scarred, grew strong again. Sani took her in. She sat with the old woman at her loom. At first, she just watched. Then, her hands, which had been so afraid, began to work. Sani taught her to weave, to take the wool, to dye it with roots and berries, to spin it, and to create the patterns. She was a natural. Her hands, which her white father had said were for books, were her mother's hands. They were strong. They were certain. She wove her story. She wove the red of the canyons. She wove the black of the night they had hidden. She wove the white of the scars they both carried. Kai would watch her. He would come in from the desert, a rabbit in his good hand, and he would stand by the door of the Hugin and just watch. She was humming. The sound, a low, contented hum, struck him. He froze. It was the sound Allah used to make, the knife, the memory. But the pain did not come. The sharpness was gone. He listened. It was not Allah's hum. It was Sarah's. It was a new sound. It was the sound of life. It was the sound of a home that was not burning. He had not just won a battle. He had won a war, the war inside himself. He was no longer a ghost. He was no longer a man of ash. He was a man sitting in the sun, listening to a woman hum, and it was enough. The seasons turned. The high canyon, which had been their refuge, became their world. The brittle, sun-baked earth of summer softened into a mild, golden autumn. The wind grew colder, carrying the sharp scent of juniper and pine from the high mesas. Winter came, not with the brutal force of the flatlands, but as a quiet, cleansing cold. A time of huddling by the fire in the hugin, a time of storytelling. And then spring returned, a miracle of small, bright wildflowers and the hopeful green of new corn in the tiny, terraced fields. Kai and Sarah healed with the land. Their wounds, the physical ones, closed. The angry, puckered scars on their bodies faded, first to a violent red, then to a pale, silvery white. They were permanent maps of the fire they had walked through, a testament to the price of their survival. Kai's left arm remained a companion, just as the medicine man had said. It was a still, quiet thing, a part of him that was forever at rest. He learned to live with it, to move with the subtle imbalance it created. His right arm, his one good arm, grew stronger. It learned to do the work of two. He learned to tie knots with one hand and his teeth. He learned to skin a rabbit, to grind corn, to lift and to carry. The old men watched him, their faces impassive, and nodded their respect. He was not a broken warrior. He was a whole man, redefined. Sarah's hands, once soft and hesitant, became sure and strong. She sat at the loom Sani had given her, and the rhythm of the work became her own heartbeat. She wove. She wove the story of her life. She wove the dark red of the canyon where they had fought. She wove the pale blue of the sky they had both, in their separate agonies, looked up to. She wove the black of the cave and the gray of the sage. She was not just a weaver. She was a storyteller. She was, as Sani said, a woman who weaves the spirit. Their bond was not one of passionate declarations. It was forged in a silence that was deeper than words. It was in the way he would return from a day of setting snares and find a small bowl of hot broth waiting for him. It was in the way she would look up from her loom and find him watching her, his dark eyes no longer haunted, but quiet and present. One evening, as the air grew cool, he came into the hugin. He carried 3 perfect blue-tipped feathers from a mountain jay. He said nothing. He just laid them, with his one good hand, on the loom beside her work. Sarah stopped her humming. She looked at the feathers. She looked at him. She saw the effort it must have taken to find them, to climb to their high nests. It was a poem. It was a promise. She reached out and touched his hand, the one that was strong. Her fingers were warm. He did not pull away. He had not pulled away since that day in the cave. He let his hand rest in hers. It was the first time they had touched, not in desperation, not in healing, but in peace. "You should weave them in," he said, his voice a low rumble. For the sky, for protection." "I will," she said. "I will weave them into a sling, for your arm." He looked at his useless arm. He had refused to cover it, to acknowledge its weakness. But this was not weakness. This was care. "Yes," he said. They were married in the winter. When the snows had closed the canyon from the outside world, there was no white dress. There was no preacher. It was a joining. A simple, profound ceremony in the hugin of the medicine man. Sani stood for Sarah's mother. The old, patient men stood for Kai's family. They ate corn pollen. They faced the east. They bound their lives together, not in the eyes of a god, but in the eyes of each other, and of the people who had taken them in. They built their own home, a small, strong hugin near the edge of the cornfield. He cut the logs, his one arm surprisingly powerful, his movements precise. She plastered the walls with mud and straw, her hands deft and sure. They built it together, a home, not a place of ashes, but a place of new, raw earth. 2 years after the battle on the ledge, Sarah gave birth to a son. Sani delivered the baby, a small, healthy boy with a thatch of black hair and his mother's bright, determined eyes. When Sani cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft skin, She brought him to Sarah. Sarah held him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and a joy so profound it was almost painful. Then she held him out to Kai. Kai stood by the fire. He was shaking. He had not realized how afraid he was. A son. He had been given a son, and he had lost him. He was a man who failed his sons. "Kai," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "Come, meet your son." He walked, his steps heavy, to the pallet. He looked down at the small, wrinkled, red face. The baby's tiny fist waved in the air. He is." Kai could not speak. "He is ours," Sarah said. She took his one good hand and placed it on the baby's chest. Kai felt the tiny, rapid heartbeat. He felt the warmth. This was not a memory. This was not a ghost. This was life. This was the future. The ice that had shattered in the cave, the last tiny shard of it that he had not even known was there. It melted. A warmth. A love so powerful it made him weak. Flooded his body. He was a father again. He knelt, his head bowed. He wept. He wept for Allah. He wept for TSO. He wept for his lost arm and his lost life. But these were not the tears of grief. They were the tears of release. He was not replacing his past. He was building on its foundations. What do we call him?" Sarah asked, her own eyes wet. Kai looked at the boy. He thought of his father-in-law, the man from the East who had loved flowers and books. He thought of his wife's dying mother, who had woven the stories of the people. This boy was a bridge. "We will call him Samuel." He said it was a good, strong name, a name from her father's world. Sarah smiled. "Samuel." She looked at the baby. "And," she said, "in the way of your people we will call him He Who Is Found, for we were both lost, and He has found us." Life was not easy. The world outside the canyon was changing. The 1860s brought new soldiers, new wars. The long walk, the forced removal of the people, was a terrible, echoing whisper that reached even their hidden canyon. Sani and the others were terrified. They were the ones who had hidden, the ones who had been left behind. But Kai and Sarah were no longer running. Kai, the one-armed man, became the eyes of the village. He knew the land. He knew the white men. He taught the old men how to hide, how to move, how to be ghosts in their own land, a skill he had perfected. They survived. The tide of war and removal washed around their small island of rock, and it did not find them. They endured. They raised their son. Samuel grew, a child of two worlds. But at home, in one, he had his mother's quick, intelligent eyes and his father's quiet, patient strength. Kai did not teach his son the bow. His arm could no longer draw it. Instead, he sat with the boy under the shadow of a high cliff. He took his good hand and drew in the dirt. He taught Samuel the tracks of the deer, the rabbit, the coyote. He taught him which plants would heal and which would feed. He taught him how to listen to the wind, how to read the clouds. He did not teach him to be a warrior. He taught him to be a survivor. He taught him to see. Sarah sat with him at the loom. His small fingers learned to thread the wool. She did not teach him just to weave. She taught him to create. She told him the stories her father had read from his books, stories of faraway places. And she told him the stories Sani had told her, the stories of first man and first woman, of Spider-Woman who had taught them to weave. She gave him a heritage of stories, of words, and of patterns. One evening, when Samuel was 6 years old, he sat with Kai by the fire. He was a serious boy, like TSO had been. He was looking at his father's left arm, the one that always rested in the dark, beaded sling Sarah had woven for him. "Father," he said, "why is your arm? Why is it still—" Kai stopped stirring the pot of rabbit stew. He looked at his son. He had known this question would come. He had dreaded it. He sat back. He looked into the fire. "Because I was in a great battle." Kai said, "A long time ago, before you." Did you win?" Samuel asked, his eyes wide. Kai thought of the ledge. He thought of the bodies. He thought of Tabor. He thought of Sarah, bleeding in the cave. "Yes," Kai said, "we won." "But the man, he hurt you." "Yes, he did. He and other men like him, they hurt many people. They hurt your mother's family. They hurt my family, a long time ago. They were men who carried a great fire inside them." "A fire?" "A fire," Kai said. He looked at Sarah, who had stopped her work to listen. "A fire of hate. It burned them. It made them mean, and they tried to burn the world with it." They sound evil," Samuel whispered. "They were." Kai said, "But your mother, she taught me something. She taught me that you cannot fight that fire with more fire, because it just burns you too. It burns your home." Samuel frowned, trying to understand. I wanted to," Kai said, his voice a low confession. "I wanted to let that fire burn me. I wanted vengeance. But your mother, she saved me. She showed me a different way." "What way?" Kai reached out his good hand and put it on his son's head. "The way of staying, of living, of building a new home, of you." He had not forgiven. He could not forget. But he had let go. He had chosen. He had chosen this small boy, this strong woman, this quiet life. He had chosen peace. Sarah came and sat beside them. She put her arm around Kai's good shoulder. Samuel leaned into his father's side. They sat there, the three of them, watching the flames. The fire in the Hugin was not a fire of hate. It was a fire of warmth, a fire of life. The future was not a promise. It was a challenge. The world outside was still hard. It was still filled with men like Tabor, with misunderstanding, with violence. But here, in this small, hidden place, a man with one arm and a woman with a scarred past had built something. They had taken the ashes of their old lives and built a new one. They were not defined by their pain. They were defined by their love, a love that was quiet and resilient, and as enduring as the red rock of the desert itself. They were together, and they were, finally, at peace. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales, like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.